What's up everybody, Tyler Vaughn from Pathology Performance. I want to go over a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which would be the demands for baseball and or softball on this. So I want to go over what it is and what it is not. So what are these demands for baseball and softball? Number one, primarily the energy systems used and that have to be prepared would be the anaerobic system and the creatine phosphate system. We'll get into that a little bit more later on, but mainly the thing to think about here is power production, and not just power production, but how can we repeat high levels of power for long periods of time. Okay, so that's something that I want you to keep in the back of your head. Number two, mass can be gas, right? A lot of people say mass equals gas, and if you look at the difference between high school and then college and pro baseball, especially with pitching, one of the biggest differences is just lean body mass. And so mass, I tell my clients that mass doesn't guarantee an increase in velocity, but it does give you the higher potential to create velocity. So that's something important to remember. Quality over quantity. So many times I hear about practices that are lasting 4, 5, 6 hours. And I think the goal would actually be to have a good game plan, to be structured. I know some of these high school teams have a whole lot of personnel, and so it can be difficult to kind of rein that in. But you got to remember, if mass can be gas, and if our idea is to produce more power more efficiently, then if we're just out on the field for very, very long periods of time, it's hard to maintain body mass, and that power production level is going to go down and we become less efficient, which also leads to higher injury risk, especially for pitchers who are throwing bullpens at the end of practice, right? So something to think about there. Number four is going to be unilateral and specialty training, right? So there's a lot of sports that can benefit from general strength and conditioning. I think baseball is one of those as well, and softball early on. But when you start getting to a higher level of play, there are specific things that need to be addressed. No longer are power cleans and barbell bench press and back squats the only thing that could be in your program, right? So getting onto one leg, making sure that you're addressing the rotator cuff specifically, adding in things that are unilateral like carries, lateral jumping, vertical jumping, power production activities. It needs to be a little bit more specialized to baseball or softball. And honestly, you can tell I do a lot more coaching with baseball and softball, but very similar demands. The main thing to remember is there are very specific skills and very specific ways that baseball and softball players need to produce force, and so training those is very important. So moving from generalist to specialist, I think is very healthy. And also on that note, specializing early is not a recommendation, right? I like to see overall athleticism being developed. So, all right, moving on to what it is not. This will be some misconceptions. So we've got aerobic distance running. I've heard people say a lot like, oh, I'm gonna have my son do cross country so that he'll be in great shape for baseball. Number one, distance running is not going to improve sprint speed. It's just not gonna happen, okay? You're training a different system that's long and slow. You're really working on the aerobic system there, which can be great for building a base, right? For being able to recover more quickly. I think the aerobic system gets a bad rap for always being long and slow. There are ways to train the aerobic system where you can get on power repeats, and that would be much more effective. I don't think that long, slow distance days are bad in the off season, or potentially even once a week during the season, as long as it's not the basis of your training and you know what you're trying to get out of it, right? It is gonna increase blood flow. It is gonna help with recovery time if you build that nice base, and it is something that can be useful, but it should not be the basis of your training, and that's actually been shown to be able to take away from building mass and also from producing power. So some things to keep in mind. Baseball should not be a cross-country practice. Number two, punishment push-ups. That is something that I've heard a lot about lately. I obviously work with a lot of baseball players and younger teams, travel teams, middle school teams. I hear about coaches having kids do push-ups. And first of all, softball or baseball, a lot of middle schoolers do not have the strength to complete a proper push-up. So you're asking them to go throw a whole lot, and most of these kids haven't thrown in the off season. So you're ramping up their throwing volume, and then you're having them do punishment push-ups in between, which is further wearing down their arm. And then what do I get in the clinic from this? A bunch of rotator cuff aggravation. So something to keep in mind, punishment push-ups are not the way to go for baseball. If you need to do punishment stuff, my recommendation, as far as for mentality, my recommendation is keep a running chart and have them run that stuff after practice, or increase the intensity of your practice itself. So number three, weights or lifting heavy are bad. So we should avoid weight work or weightlifting activities that are heavy. I think this is absolutely false, and one of the most traditional things I hear, aside from what's coming up next, And I think there's guys out there who are doing it right. There's a book out by Zach Decken. It's awesome, Movement Over Maxes. He focuses on quality of movement. He's been the strength and conditioning coach at TCU. And some of their guys were hitting PRs, personal records, on deadlifting during the College World Series. And so I think it's just creating an understanding of when to build the base with volume of reps, and then when to decrease volume and just focus on intensity to keep everything firing and efficient. Weightlifting heavy is very healthy, and you have to choose the right lifts. I don't want somebody going in there trying to hit a heavy snatch or really snatching at all for baseball or softball, but there are some lifts like deadlifts or maybe even front squats that could be very beneficial to really progress over time to make sure everything is primed and guys are maintaining mass throughout the season. The next one, this is probably my biggest pet peeve. Lactic acid is the cause of my shoulder soreness, so therefore I have to run forever to get it to go away. I think there is benefit to running after a long outing just to get the blood flowing, but we have to understand what it's doing, right? It's just increasing the heart rate, increasing blood flow, and that helps to decrease soreness generally. However, your arm is not sore from a buildup of lactic acid, right? So I will say that again, lactic acid is not causing the soreness that you have in your shoulder. It is actually micro trauma in your shoulder, so small tears. What the running can help with is increasing blood flow to bring in new healing factors. Okay, so the narrative of I've got to run to get the lactic acid out of my arm has got to go. It's been disproven for a long time. Believe it or not, you actually accumulate lactate and free hydrogen. It's not even a bunch of lactate swimming around in your bloodstream. And lactate can be used as an energy source. So that is a soapbox for me. I hear that all the time still. Let's stop running our pitchers just to get the lactic acid out of their arm. Okay, let's move on from that. Number 5, ibuprofen and icing. There's actually some stuff that has come out recently in the research that basically says that icing chronically and use of ibuprofen can actually blunt the healing response by decreasing inflammation temporarily. That is the body's response to increased trauma or workload, and it can be healthy, right? And people get very polar about this. I don't think that it's wrong to use those on occasion, but to think that these things are helping with healing may not be the right way to think about it. Icing in and of itself can be a great option for decreasing pain, right? It's going to decrease the temperature of the area. It can give you that local analgesic effect, but there usually ends up being a flushing effect after the ice comes off. And so these things were kind of the Bible of acute injuries and how to treat them, and it is not necessarily the case anymore. So I think the acronym now is peace and love, which I feel like we could have come up with a better acronym. But that is what it is. So if you want to see what that recommends, just look that up, and it's based on some research that's come out. So I think ideally, if we are going to train specialty athletes, softball players, baseball players, overhead athletes, we have to understand the demands on the system. And I would challenge everyone to think about utilizing options for training that are up to date in the research. And it doesn't take being an absolute nerd. There are plenty of awesome resources out there. Eric Cressy, Mike Reinhold, Zach Decken, those are guys that I've been following for a while, and there's a lot more out there than that, but those are just 3 on the top of my head. Those guys are putting out a lot of very good information that is free, and if you want your athletes to respond well and you want them to get better, it's a great place to go. All right, so don't feel like you have to go out to 17 different seminars to learn about all this stuff. It's more so just being interested in the topics so that the people that you're working with can improve. But ideally, if you're working with a specialty athlete, you have to understand the demands of that specialty. So this is something that I'm very passionate about. This isn't even getting into arm care very much, but these are just a couple of things that I have seen that I really like to go over with my athletes. So I hope that's helpful. If you guys have any questions, let me know.